Hey there, welcome back. This is Jaxon, and this is Animal Encounters. In this episode, I'm examining the most stupid ways people have done in zoos, making them a fatality. From a man who refused to believe a crocodile was real, to a woman who grabbed one of the most dangerous snakes on Earth to prove a point. Let's start with the first story, where a man's disbelief carried him past every barrier designed to keep him alive. It was January 21st, 2018, at a privately operated wildlife and reptile park in the Northern Territory of Australia, where the midday heat pressed flat over a wide lagoon enclosure and the water's surface sat completely still. Thick concrete barriers and chain-link fencing separated the public boardwalk from the lagoon below, and warning signs were posted at regular intervals along the entire perimeter. Victor Mendez, 39, was a diesel mechanic from Tucson, Arizona, in the final stretch of a solo road trip through northern Australia. He had no background in wildlife or zoology, and people who knew him described him as deeply skeptical of anything he hadn't personally verified, with a consistent habit of dismissing expert warnings as exaggeration or performance. He had traveled to the park alone and moved through several exhibit areas in the morning without incident, spending more time at the Crocodile Lagoon than anywhere else on the grounds. When Victor reached the Crocodile Lagoon, he fixated on a large saltwater crocodile floating near the bank along the far side of the enclosure. The animal had been completely motionless for an extended period, and Victor maintained throughout that afternoon that it was not real, a prop, an animatronic, or a restrained animal being used to frighten tourists. Staff working a feeding demonstration earlier in the day had explained that sustained stillness was entirely normal behavior for the species. Victor did not accept the explanation. I've looked at a lot of captive crocodile incident reports, and the same detail keeps appearing. People see the stillness and read it as safety. It's the opposite. For nearly 20 minutes, Victor remained near the public viewing rail, tossing small pebbles toward the lagoon and making comments to nearby visitors. When the crowd moved on, he stayed. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with adult males commonly reaching 17 feet in length and exceeding 1,000 pounds. Their hunting technique does not rely on open pursuit. It relies on patience. A saltwater crocodile can remain motionless at the water's surface for hours, body temperature regulated by the surrounding environment, eyes and nostrils barely exposed, waiting for prey to close the distance on its own. Their strike, when it comes, is among the most explosive movements in the animal kingdom, covering several feet in under a second. The behavior Victor had been watching for the better part of an afternoon was not the sign of an artificial animal. It was active ambush posture. Security footage reviewed after the incident showed Victor crossing over a restricted maintenance fence near the rear of the enclosure, well beyond the public boardwalk. He moved toward the lagoon slowly at first, covering roughly 2 minutes of approach before lowering himself toward the bank at approximately 15 feet from the water's edge. The footage also showed he paused twice during the approach, standing still for several seconds before continuing forward. And this is the part that's hard to understand, because every single thing around Victor was designed to tell him the danger was real. The fences, the signs, the staff warnings. At some point, he stopped treating the enclosure like a habitat and started treating it like a challenge to his own skepticism. The crocodile erupted from the surface instantly. The lunge was complete before Victor could move, jaws closing around his lower leg with force sufficient to fracture bone on contact. The pull dragged him forward into shallow water along the rocky bank. He braced against the terrain with both hands, but the animal shifted its grip upward and the leverage disappeared. Staff activated emergency alarms within seconds of the disturbance, and a response team reached the rear of the enclosure rapidly. The injuries Victor sustained in the first moments of the attack, severe crush trauma, and catastrophic vascular damage to the lower extremities, were already fatal before responders could safely intervene. Emergency services confirmed his death at the scene. Medical examiners later determined blood loss from the initial bite and secondary trauma were the primary causes. Investigators confirmed the crocodile had displayed no unusual behavior. Its motionless posture along the bank was entirely consistent with documented ambush behavior for the species. No action was taken against the animal. The park reinforced and extended the rear maintenance fencing in the weeks following the incident, and the boardwalk area was fitted with additional secondary barriers. Park management also introduced a secondary patrol schedule for the maintenance zone during public operating hours. Victor's body was repatriated to the United States. His family was notified through the consulate. The park resumed normal operations within days. What remains is a straightforward outcome from a sequence of decisions that each felt minor in the moment. Crossing a fence, walking closer, leaning toward the bank, until none of them were reversible. Footage from the incident was kept away from public eye to discourage other people from doing such mistakes. The next story moves from Australia to Southern Africa, where a different kind of confidence, built around content, an audience, and a need for something more dramatic, put someone directly in the operating space of an apex predator. The result was just as fast and just as final. It was March 18, 2017, at a privately owned wildlife reserve in north-central Namibia, where open grassland stretched in every direction under a pale morning sky, and the air carried the dry, sharp smell of acacia and dust. The reserve operated small controlled photography sessions for tourist groups under direct ranger supervision, a format that had run without serious incident for several years. Leonard Voss, 31, was a freelance travel photographer and wildlife content creator from Hamburg, Germany. He had built a modest online following around close-range wildlife photography, and the specific appeal of his content was proximity. The closer the animal, the more the image performed. He had traveled through multiple African countries over the previous 2 years on similar private tours, and had a documented pattern of pushing guides for tighter positioning than operating protocols permitted. Staff at the reserve later noted that Leonard had made similar requests the previous evening during a vehicle-based game drive and had been denied each time. He joined a controlled morning session with a small tourist group and 2 experienced rangers. The session involved 2 semi-habituated lions, a male and a female, that had been born within a managed reserve environment and were accustomed to human presence at a distance. Rangers outlined the rules clearly before entry. Maintain position beside the rangers at all times, avoid any separation from the group, do not crouch or make sudden movements, and under no circumstances turn your back toward either animal. Leonard signed the required acknowledgement before the group entered the area. From what I've seen in similar cases, the signed acknowledgement becomes relevant afterward. It tells investigators the person understood the rules. What it doesn't do is change what happened. The lions remained unresponsive for the first 15 minutes of the session, moving through the grass approximately 60 feet from the group. Leonard photographed from position and then began gradually widening the gap between himself and the ranger beside him, moving laterally in small increments without drawing immediate attention. African lions, Panthera leo, are ambush predators, and semi-habituated animals that tolerate human presence at a distance do not abandon predatory instinct because of that familiarity. Research on semi-habituated lion behavior consistently identifies specific human movements as triggers for prey recognition response: physical isolation from a group, a crouched posture at ground level, and turning the back toward the animal. These are not symbolic risk factors. They are the behavioral inputs that initiate a charge sequence. An adult male lion can accelerate to 50 miles per hour in a short burst, covers ground with near-silent footfall, and typically makes contact before a human can shift position or take more than a single step in response. The male lion in this session had been tracking Leonard's lateral movement for several minutes before either ranger identified the shift in the animal's attention. Leonard had drifted approximately 12 feet from the nearest ranger. He crouched low in the grass to reframe a shot at ground level. The male lion's posture shifted, ears back, weight transferred forward, tail rising, observable behavioral markers consistent with a pre-charge assessment. One of the rangers moved immediately toward Leonard to redirect him back to position. Leonard did not return to position. He shifted his stance and turned his back toward the lion while adjusting his equipment. The lion charged. The distance closed in under 3 seconds. The impact drove Leonard forward and down, the animal securing a bite at the back of the neck and upper spine in the same motion. Rangers responded within seconds, deploying noise deterrents and repositioning a vehicle to force the animal back. The lion released and retreated into the grass. Leonard was unresponsive when Rangers reached him. Emergency evacuation was initiated immediately, but the injuries to his neck and upper body were fatal. Medical examiners confirmed the cause of death as severe trauma to the cervical spine and major vascular structures of the upper neck. He had been outside the designated safety position for less than 4 minutes from the moment he first began moving away. The reserve permanently discontinued the walking photography format following the investigation. The specific configuration, a small group in open proximity to semi-habituated lions, was ended without exception. The animals were not harmed, and rangers were cleared of negligence. Leonard had been warned about the exact movements that preceded the charge, had signed documentation confirming he understood them, and made those movements anyway. The reserve issued a revised operational policy shortly afterward, requiring a minimum group size of 4 and mandating that all participants remain in direct physical contact distance of a ranger throughout any on-foot session. His personal belongings were collected and returned to his family in Germany. His online accounts remained active for several months afterward, still showing the close-range wildlife photography that had defined his final years of work. The next story stays within controlled animal settings, but this one didn't start with someone pushing for a better angle. It started with someone trying to get a better photograph from where they were already standing, and a single slip that removed every layer of protection between her and what was below. It was August 9th, 2015, at a small reptile and wildlife exhibit park in Queensland, Australia, where the afternoon sun saturated an older section of the facility constructed decades before. More recent renovations modernized the rest of the grounds. The older enclosure was a sunken retention habitat, a deep concrete moat system approximately 10 feet below the public viewing level, separated from visitors by a steel rail barrier and posted warnings along the platform perimeter. Naomi Bell, 22, was a third-year university student from Brisbane, visiting the park with a group of 4 friends on a free afternoon. By the accounts of those who knew her, she was impulsive in social settings and regularly sought visually striking photographs for her online presence, with a pattern of working around restrictions she considered visually inconvenient. She had visited several tourist locations in the weeks prior with a similar approach, and the friends she was with that afternoon later told investigators they had become accustomed to her finding workarounds at exhibit barriers. The enclosure housed 4 saltwater crocodiles, the dominant male of which was estimated at just over 11 feet in length and close to 700 pounds. The public viewing platform had been designed for standing observation from behind the steel rail. On the outer face of that rail, approximately 18 inches of narrow concrete ledge, sat a maintenance surface not accessible to the public. The drop from that ledge to the moat floor was roughly 10 feet. The park's internal maintenance records showed the platform had been flagged for a structural review the previous year, though that review had not yet been completed at the time of the incident. Naomi told her friends the photographs from the standard viewing position were uninteresting. She climbed partially over the steel rail and repositioned herself on the outer concrete ledge, placing herself about 3 feet beyond the barrier and closer to the edge of the drop. A park employee nearby noticed immediately and moved toward her, instructing her to return to the viewing side. Naomi shifted her stance on the ledge to adjust her angle, while the employee continued toward her. In repositioning her weight and hands, she lost her grip on the concrete surface. She fell from the ledge and dropped approximately 10 feet into the lower moat. Saltwater crocodiles in captivity maintain the same territorial hierarchy found in wild populations. The dominant animal in a shared enclosure controls access to space and responds to sudden environmental disturbance with immediate approach behavior. A large body entering from above, combined with the impact force and significant surface disruption, constitutes a reliable and consistent trigger. Studies on captive saltwater crocodile response document that dominant individuals in enclosed habitats approach disturbances at the surface within seconds of occurrence. That response is not aggression in the conventional sense. It is occupancy behavior, and the outcome of a body entering that space is determined by proximity and stimulus, not by intent. The dominant crocodile moved towards the point of impact within moments. Park staff triggered emergency response protocols and attempted to reach the lower level. The attack was rapid, a grip and rotation sequence that caused immediate and catastrophic trauma. Emergency personnel entered the enclosure area within minutes, but the injuries sustained in the initial attack were not survivable. Naomi was pronounced dead before transport was possible. The incident was classified as a wildlife fatality resulting from a barrier breach. No action was taken against the animals. The park permanently decommissioned the older public viewing structure for that enclosure and replaced it with a fully enclosed elevated platform during renovations completed the following year. The pending structural review of the original platform was cited in the subsequent safety assessment as an indicator that the viewing area had been operating beyond its intended service life. There is something about this case that I find particularly hard to move past. The fall wasn't the plan. She didn't intend to go into that enclosure, but every decision made in the minutes before, it put her in a position where one slip had no recovery. The margin was that thin. Naomi's family was notified the same day. There was no extended media coverage, and the rest of the park continued normal operations. What this case comes down to is how quickly an unintended outcome followed a deliberate choice to breach a safety barrier. A few seconds of repositioning that removed every layer of protection between her and the enclosure. What comes next is a different kind of incident entirely. No open lagoon, no exhibit platform, and no photograph. The next case involves a small private primate facility in rural Florida, a containment failure that lasted only minutes, and a visitor who moved through both layers before anyone realized what was happening. It was November 11, 2018, at a small privately run primate rescue facility on a rural property in Marion County, Florida, where aging chain-link enclosures sat beneath a heavy tree canopy, and the afternoon air was warm and still. It was not a licensed exhibit or formal zoo. It was a small recovery facility that had expanded organically over the years without significant infrastructure investment or routine re-inspection. The enclosure structures in use at the time of the incident had not been substantially upgraded since the facility first opened, and several had been patched or reinforced using materials sourced by staff rather than through contracted maintenance. Patricia Dunn, 47, was a recently retired district-level school administrator from the Tampa area who had been donating to the facility for approximately a year after connecting with one of its staff members at a local conservation event. She had arranged a private visit through that contact and arrived mid-afternoon with no formal guided protocol in place. It was her second visit to the grounds, and staff later confirmed she had been given a general orientation during her first visit several months prior. The facility housed several primates across a series of older enclosures. The primary concern that afternoon was an adult male chimpanzee, 14 years old, in captivity since birth, housed in an inner enclosure structure surrounded by a secondary outer perimeter fence designed to create a buffer corridor between the enclosure mesh and the property's general access areas. Staff had documented in internal records that the animal displayed escalating agitation when unfamiliar visitors entered that outer corridor, which was not intended for public access under any circumstances. That afternoon, one of the facility's handlers had been moving a juvenile animal between pens and passed through the secondary access gate on the outer perimeter, a manually latched swing gate controlling entry into the buffer corridor. On the handler's return pass through the gate, the latch did not fully engage. The handler moved to another area of the property, unaware the gate had not caught. Patricia made her way from the outer public viewing path toward the enclosure area. Finding the secondary gate unlatched, she pushed through and entered the buffer corridor, placing herself between the outer perimeter fence and the primary enclosure mesh, approximately 3 feet from the chimpanzee's housing structure. Chimpanzees, pan troglodytes, are considerably more powerful than their size suggests. Adult males weigh between 90 and 130 pounds, but are estimated to be 4 to 5 times stronger than an average adult human, with grip and jaw force capable of causing catastrophic structural damage to human limbs. Their behavioral escalation before physical aggression is consistent and well documented. Vocalizations rise in frequency and volume, body posture stiffens, and the animal fixes sustained eye contact on a perceived threat within its immediate spatial boundary. When a chimpanzee bites during an attack, it does not bite once, Repeated, targeted biting at the hands, forearms, and upper arms is characteristic of the behavior pattern. The adult male had been watching Patricia from the moment she entered the corridor. Its vocalizations had become loud and sustained before she reached the mesh. Patricia extended her hand toward the enclosure structure. The chimpanzee seized her right arm through a mesh gap, immediately pulling it against the fencing and biting down at the upper arm. It did not release. It bit again at the forearm while maintaining its grip, and a third bite at the forearm pulled tissue away from the underlying muscle in a partial degloving pattern. The skin and connective tissue stripped back from a section roughly 4 inches in length. The force applied through the mesh against Patricia's arm also produced crush trauma to the bone structure of the forearm. Staff heard the vocalizations from across the property and reached the corridor within roughly 2 minutes. Noise deterrents and physical barriers were used to force the animal to release. Patricia was removed from the corridor. The injuries were immediately severe. 3 deep bite wounds, partial degloving of the right forearm, significant crush trauma to the underlying bone, and hemorrhage from the upper arm consistent with brachial artery involvement. Direct pressure was applied on site, but bleeding from the upper arm wound was difficult to control. She was transported by ambulance to a regional medical center approximately 18 miles from the property, remaining conscious during transport. Emergency surgery addressed the brachial artery damage and attempted reconstruction of the degloving injury. Due to the extent of bacterial contamination typical of primate bite wounds, surgeons left portions of the wound partially open to reduce abscess risk rather than closing the tissue fully, a standard approach in severe animal bite management, but one that increases the surface area exposed to infection over the recovery period. Post-operative swelling in the repaired arm developed into compartment syndrome within hours, requiring a secondary surgical procedure to relieve pressure. The combination of blood loss, 2 surgeries, and the contamination load from the bites placed significant stress on Patricia's system. By the following morning, she had developed a fever and early indicators of systemic infection. Sepsis was confirmed by the afternoon of November 12th. Multi-organ failure followed over the next several hours. Patricia died in the early hours of November 14th, approximately 60 hours after the attack. Cause of death was documented as septic shock and multi-organ failure, secondary to severe soft tissue trauma and wound contamination. The incident was reviewed by state wildlife authorities, who found the facility had been operating under a private permit that had not been re-inspected in several years. The handler involved was interviewed and cleared of deliberate negligence, but the facility received multiple citations for containment standards and was placed under a corrective action order. The chimpanzee was not euthanized. All visitor access was suspended indefinitely pending the investigation. Investigators noted in their final report that the manual latch system on the secondary gate had shown previous signs of wear and that a replacement had been requisitioned, but not yet installed at the time of the incident. I've gone through a significant number of primate attack case reports, and what this case reflects is something that comes up consistently in smaller, older facilities. The infrastructure was built for a different era, and the containment gaps in an aging system aren't always visible until something passes through one. Patricia bypassed 2 barriers, and the second one only failed because a latch didn't catch on a routine pass-through. That is how small the margin was. Patricia's family held a private service in the Tampa area. There was no significant public coverage beyond regional health and safety reporting, and the facility continued operating under restricted conditions in the months that followed. What remains is a case built entirely from small failures stacked on each other: an unsecured gate, an unattended visitor, an approach that covered 3 feet too many, each one ordinary and none of them recoverable. The final story in this episode is the most geographically distant of all. Not Australia, not Africa, not Florida. It involves a small independent reptile center in Southeast Asia, a venomous snake in a live demonstration, and a woman who entered a restricted zone with complete certainty that she understood the animal better than the handler managing it. She had less than 5 seconds to find out she was wrong. It was May 2nd, 2013. at a small independent reptile education center on the outskirts of a tourist area in southern Thailand, where a late afternoon demonstration had drawn a moderate crowd under an open-air thatched structure. The center operated daily educational shows staffed by licensed local handlers with documented training in venomous species management. It was a small operation with no on-site clinical staff and no capacity for emergency medical intervention beyond basic first aid, running live animal demonstrations in a format common to the region. The nearest hospital equipped to administer anti-venom and manage respiratory emergencies was located more than 20 miles from the facility, along a road that moved slowly during afternoon tourist hours. Sharon Pike, 34, was a nightlife promoter and self-described lifestyle personality from Orlando, Florida, traveling through Southeast Asia on an extended personal trip. She had no background in herpetology or venomous animal handling. Acquaintances described her as highly social and quick to challenge authority in situations she interpreted as exaggerated or performative. She arrived at the Reptile Center midway through an afternoon session as part of a larger tourist group, and within minutes of arriving had positioned herself at the front of the viewing area nearest to the demonstration zone. The ongoing session involved a king cobra being managed inside a roped demonstration zone, while visitors observed from behind a rope divider several feet back. The handler had been conducting demonstrations at the facility for over a decade. Attendees had been verbally briefed at entry that all snakes on display were fully venomous, that the rope divider was a hard boundary, and that any breach of the demonstration zone carried both personal liability and immediate removal from the premises. Sharon moved to the front of the viewing area shortly after arriving and remained near the divider, making repeated comments to nearby tourists, dismissing the handler's precautions as performance. The king cobra, Ophiophagus hanna, is the longest venomous snake in the world, capable of reaching 18 feet in length. What distinguishes it from other venomous species is not its size, but the volume and nature of its envenomation. A single bite injects a large quantity of predominantly neurotoxic venom, a compound that does not cause localized tissue destruction, but instead systematically disrupts the nervous system, progressively paralyzing voluntary muscles, including, ultimately, the diaphragm. King cobras are capable of delivering multiple bites in rapid succession when physically restrained or grabbed without warning, because handling constitutes an extreme stress trigger that drives repeated strike response. Even with antivenom administered quickly, severe envenomation from multiple bites can cause respiratory failure within hours, and the window for effective intervention narrows as symptoms progress. The animal in the demonstration had not been defanged, chemically sedated, or altered in any way. It was a fully venomous adult in a controlled demonstration environment, exactly as the handler had stated at the start of the session. Sharon moved under the rope divider and entered the demonstration zone. The handler responded immediately, stepping toward her to redirect her out of the area. Sharon reached down and gripped the body of the cobra before the handler could intervene. The snake's response was instantaneous. It bit her on the right forearm, withdrew, and bit again at the upper arm within the same second. A third bite connected at the shoulder as the handler made contact with the animal and worked to separate it from Sharon. The entire sequence lasted less than 5 seconds. Other tourists at the rope divider moved back immediately, and the handler secured the animal before turning attention to Sharon. Sharon was moved out of the demonstration zone. Emergency services were contacted, and anti-venom administration began at the center within approximately 12 minutes of the bites. She was transported to a regional hospital by private vehicle, as the nearest facility with full emergency capabilities was over 20 miles from the center. She was conscious during transport. Symptoms progressed over the following hours, despite anti-venom treatment. By evening, Sharon had developed significant respiratory difficulty consistent with neurotoxic progression from a high-volume envenomation. Medical staff administered supplemental oxygen and attempted intubation, but respiratory failure was confirmed later that night. She was pronounced dead in the early hours of May 3rd. Physicians noted that 3 full bites from an adult king cobra had delivered a volume of venom that exceeded the capacity of available intervention, compounded by the distance to full hospital-level care and the time elapsed before arrival. The incident was reviewed by local authorities. The handler was cleared of all negligence. All protocols had been followed, all warnings had been issued, and Sharon had bypassed a physical boundary to enter the restricted zone on her own. The center suspended public demonstrations during the investigation and subsequently added a secondary hard barrier behind the rope divider before resuming operations. Staff were also issued updated response protocols covering scenarios where a visitor breached the demonstration zone during an active session. From what I've found in venomous animal incident research, this case comes down to the math. 3 bites in under 5 seconds, 12 minutes to anti-venom, over 20 miles to a trauma facility. Any one of those factors in isolation might have changed the outcome. All 3 together made it nearly impossible. The moment Sharon made contact with that animal, the sequence was already in motion, and there was no step after that point that could have cleanly reversed it. Sharon's personal belongings were collected and shipped home through consular staff. Her family was notified through the American embassy. There was no sustained coverage in the English language press, and the tourist area continued operating without disruption. What this case shares with every other case in this episode is the same structure, a rule that existed for a specific, documented reason, a person who decided it didn't apply to them, and a consequence that arrived faster than any corrective action could. Sharon had a handler in front of her, a rope barrier between her and the animal, and verbal instructions repeated throughout the session. She moved past all of it in a matter of seconds, and the snake responded in kind.